Okay, yeah. So I found a documentary, uh, BBC, The Story of Skinhead. This was done by Don Letts. That's the guy's name, and he was a member of the group called BAD, Big Audio Dynamite. Now, Big Audio Dynamite was a bounce off from The Clash, the group called The Clash. So he did this documentary, and the very beginning of the documentary, which I'll play, he goes into where the skinheads really came from. It was a movement that came out of Jamaica. It was a fashion, basically, it was a fashion statement that a lot of the rude boys from Kingston that came out of Jamaica, especially during the Windrush era, when they came to London, they had a sense of style, the way they dressed, the way they wear their hair. And later you had so-called white people copying that. As always, they're always copying us because what does the scripture say about Israel? We're the form of all things. Yahweh Shai said that we are the salt of the earth. Salt brings flavor. So when the so-called blacks came over there to England shortly after World War II during the Windrush, in particular Jamaica, they brought a sense of style with them, the way they dressed, the way they wore their hair. So they were called skinheads. And that movement grew in England, especially the reggae music, the ska music, and then later the reggae music helped to fuel it. And then later it was hijacked, taken over by neo-Nazis and all of that. So to this day, people associate skinheads with that because they haven't really done their research. Okay, so without further ado, let's check it out.
What do you think when you hear the word skinhead? Violence, intolerance, hatred? This image was born in the 1970s, when this youth-driven subculture earned a reputation for trouble on the streets and terraces, and a toxic association with racism. But that's
now the truth is, a lot of those Edomites that were into the skinhead movement, a lot of them were Jake. A lot of them were of Irish stock. A lot of them were tough, man. Tough little bastards, man. And those were Jakes, man. But you had this thing with the color thing, and the people hating each other because of their color. That's a recent new phenomenon. Before the 1500s, before the 1500s, that was really unheard of. That didn't really come into prominence until going into the 1600s. You hate a person because of the color of their skin. Okay, so it's a lot of ignorance, man. Anyway, let's move on. Back then, a person was hated because of what class they was. It wasn't because of the color of their skin. Like during the time of the Romans, when the Romans were on the scene, in the early century AD, you weren't hated because of the color of your skin. You were hated because of what class you were from, what class your family was. Okay, that's a recent new phenomenon. And I know other brothers who have done their research will jump in on that. Okay, I hate him because of the color of his skin, And that's the ultimate in ignorance. You hate a person because, forget about the content of their character, you just hate them because of the color of their skin. And then Hollywood helped to fuel that shit, And guess who was behind that? You got it, the so-called Jews, the small hatters. Anyway, let's move on.
How it started, and it's certainly not what it meant to me. There was a time we were united on the dance floor, dressed to kill, and if only for a moment, it felt like colour didn't matter.
Skinhead was always a multicultural thing. Skinhead was born of a mixed marriage between Jamaican culture and white working class London culture, Cockney culture. And that's what it always was. So
it was the white working class, Cockney, like you said, Cockney culture, who was following the Jakes that came out of Jamaica, that came to England, i.e. the Windrush generation. They came with a sense of style, which a lot of the downtrodden so-called whites that were already over there in England decided to copy. Okay? That's the truth. All right? That's where that skinhead came out of. Okay?
These idiots to come along later and say, no, it's a racist thing. How can it be racist? How can you be so ignorant of the roots of the thing you're trying to be?
Subcultures are interesting. Skinheads are one of the most
The
enduring.
reason why they have their head like that, shaved like that, is because they were following Jake. The Jakes that came out of Jamaica that had that kind of haircut. Very, very closely cut to the head. Skinhead. And, you know, so-called Jamaicans are known to put labels on things. They say, "Why, you're a skinhead, boy. You're a skinhead." And that's where that came from, man. But then later it was hijacked into, now you think of skinhead, now you're thinking of neo-Nazi crap. It didn't begin like that. That's what this guy is going into. And that's the documentary that Don Letts, he did his research. That's the documentary that he made, going into, like the title says here, the story of Skinhead.
One of the most striking and...
Now this woman here, she's a lead singer of the group called the Selector. All right, her real name is Belinda Magnus, but she goes by the name Pauline Black. Now she called herself Pauline Black because her father was of Yoruba descent, the so-called Nigerian, and her mother was a so-called Jew, a small hatter. And she grew up in, I believe she came out of Coventry, and the same area the group the Specials came out of, right? And when she came of age, she found out her real culture, you know, so-called black, Nigerian and all that, Caribbean and all that. She decided to adopt the name Black, i.e. Pauline Black. But her real name was her real name is Belinda Magnus. She still performs today. You know, she was famous for the song "On My Radio" by the Selector. Okay, so let's move on.
For me, interesting because they contain that contradiction of liking one thing, but sometimes having differing views.
This is a story of kids trying to find a voice and a place in society. It's a very British tale that reflects our national culture, good and bad. And it seems that throughout its troubled life, there's been an ongoing struggle for the soul of Skinhead.
Yeah, with the Doc Martens, you seen them walking with them tall boots. The Doc Martens, that came later. When the first skinheads came on the scene, they were dressing like Jake, particularly Jake from Jamaica. Okay, they were wearing the certain type of shoes and all that. Them Doc Martens came later. Okay, that was built into that neo-Nazi shit. Anyway, this is a good documentary. You can check it out. The Story of Skinhead by Don Letts. All right, so that's what I was talking about earlier in the video that I made earlier. So on to the next one.